Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Today we welcome Andrew Tettenborn, a law professor at Swansea University, to analyse the outcomes of recent high-profile meetings between US President Donald Trump, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and French President Emmanuel Macron. These discussions have major implications for global security and transatlantic relations. How will these developments shape the future of the war in Ukraine? Well, let's explore these questions with Professor Tettenborn. Welcome back, Professor. Good to have you.
Good morning.
Good morning to you. So before we kick off, there's a short soundbite I'd like to share with you of Keir Starmer.
There's a famous slogan in the United Kingdom from after the Second World War. That is that we have to win the peace. And that's what we must do now. Because it can't be peace that rewards the aggressor or that gives encouragement to regimes like Iran.
We're working very hard to get that war brought to an end. I think we've made a lot of progress, and I think it's moving along pretty rapidly. And I want to thank all of the people that are here that have been working on it. And we'll let you know what happens. It'll either be fairly soon or it won't be at all.
Fairly soon or not at all? Peace in Ukraine. Your comments, sir?
My feeling is probably that there is a chance that Keir Starmer will have success here. We obviously don't know yet. The problem is that unlike many previous US presidents, Donald Trump is an enigmatic man, and you can't necessarily take what he says at face value. And in fact, he made that clear when he backtracked on previous suggestions that Volodymyr Zelensky was some kind of dictator. So it's a matter very much of watching what Trump is likely to do rather than what he says. But I think it is true, and I think that certainly the British Prime Minister has recognized this, that Trump will act in accordance with what he sees as the interests of the US, and he may very well have persuaded Donald Trump that it is in the interests of the US to move at least a little bit towards the position of Ukraine. And I think that is the mark of his success.
What makes you think that, Professor?
What makes me think that? Because Trump has thrown out hints that he may be prepared to backtrack a little on his position in Ukraine. Also, the United States has now got this deal for mineral rights in Ukraine, and it will be very much in the United States' interest to look after those mineral rights. Now,
Right.
That's why I said look much more closely to what is likely to be in America's interest. And if Sir Keir Starmer can persuade him that a softer line on Ukraine is likely to be in America's interest, then that, I think, is half the battle won.
Right.
It's only half the battle won. We don't know what will happen in future. Donald Trump is a remarkably unpredictable man. You know, he's said, well, we may very well be able to do more in Ukraine. We may provide the United Kingdom with a trade deal. We'll have to see whether that happens. But I think there are some signs that that may happen.
Understood. Professor, if I may just interrupt for a second. Now, before we get to the trade deals, which I do want us to talk about, staying with Ukrainian security, I mean, Keir Starmer has said on a number of occasions that he's quite prepared to put British boots on the ground. as part of a peacekeeping force. And Donald Trump said, well, if you do that, he said, the British military is great, but if you need help, I've got your back. What does that suggest to you? Is Trump, in a roundabout way saying, yeah, I'll support a peacekeeping force in Ukraine?
Well, he may be suggesting that, but it comes back to the fact that you've got to be a little bit careful before you take at face value a lot of what Trump says. That's why I went back earlier and said you've got to look to what is likely to be in the United States interests, or the United States interests as seen by Donald Trump. And the question is whether he is likely to come to the conclusion that it is in the United States interests to hold our back, or to be at our back, if we go into Ukraine. Now, I suspect that he may very well do so. And I think he also has a feeling that Britain and maybe one or two other countries in Europe, and Poland, of course, is a very good example, because the Polish armed forces are now being increased, as you mentioned earlier. But I think he recognizes that Britain is likely, or more likely than some other European countries, to step up. That may, of course, also explain the slightly different treatment which was accorded to the British Prime Minister and to Emmanuel Macron, whose picture I see in front of me.
Right. Well, I will be asking you about Macron in just a second. Now, the second major area between the UK and US, of course, is that of tariffs. And again, we see some quite positive noises coming from President Trump. And he's saying, if we can do a deal, we may be able to get rid of the tariffs altogether. Do you think there's a possibility of that?
There might be. There are sticking points. Partly, of course, very many interests in America remain firmly protectionist. There are also sticking points in that Britain has so far been making rather worrying noises about whether it will necessarily admit American information companies into Britain on terms that they like. And there are worries by American corporations like Google and others on the British attitude to free speech. If those can be got over, then I think there is a reasonable chance of a trade deal. But there's a saying in England that the opera is not over until the fat lady sings. And nothing can be guaranteed.
Indeed. Now, I just want, in the last couple of minutes that we have left, Professor, I want to talk about Macron's visit to Trump. I think we've got a very short soundbite that I'd like to share.
Europe is loaning the money to Ukraine. They get their money back.
No, in fact, to be frank, we paid 60% of the total efforts, and it was through, like the US, loans, guarantee, grants, and we provided real money, to be clear. We have 230 billion frozen assets in Europe, Russian assets, but this is not as a collateral of a loan, because this is not our belonging. So they are frozen. If at the end of the day, in the negotiation we will have with Russia, they're ready to give it to us, super. It will be loan at the end of the day, and Russia will have paid for that.
If you believe that, it's okay with me.
Mr. President,
if they get their money back, we don't, and now we do. But that's only fair.
Mr. President.
Now, what I found of note there, and I wonder if you agree, is the body language and the tone that was being used between the two. Do you believe that there is some kind of rapport between these two leaders?
I'm not entirely sure. A lot of would-be psychologists have analysed this. I'm remarkably unconvinced. I think that President Trump has a visceral distrust of certainly the countries in Western Europe, and I think that probably remains. And although he's doing his best to be polite, I also have a very strong suspicion that he was not pleased to be directly contradicted by Emmanuel Macron. I don't see in this anything more than a formal rapprochement for the sake of the television cameras. I think there is a great deal more work to be done, but before we see anything more in the way of a rapprochement.
Understood. Now, there is some conjecture that Trump was going to cancel Zelensky's visit, which is taking place today, but after meeting Macron, he changed his mind. Do you think there's any meat to that argument?
No. I suspect that Donald Trump made up his own mind. I very much doubt whether he would have changed it as a result of anything said by Macron. He was, if anything, not particularly receptive to the way that Emmanuel Macron put his case.
Understood.
It goes back to the fact, I think, that Donald Trump has recognized that he may have to do more for Ukraine.
Right.
And has made a virtue of necessity in this case.
Understood. Professor, unfortunately, we're going to have to end it there. The clock has beaten us, but do come and see us again shortly. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
And that's all from us in this episode of World Talks. Goodbye.